Welcome to today's deep dive. We're going to be taking a look at tariffs. We have an insightful report here from Insoco. They're a company that works right at the intersection of construction and manufacturing, and they've had some real-world experiences that highlight how tariffs, these taxes on traded goods, can really send ripples through entire industries.
One of the things that's really interesting about Insoco's perspective is that they're not just talking about how tariffs impact their own business, but also how they're seeing it affect their clients, especially when it comes to constructing manufacturing facilities.
Yeah, it's almost like a domino effect, right? You get one change in cost, and it can really just topple all these carefully laid plans. And actually, Insoco give this really great example in the report of what happens when you're building a new facility. Target, and then all of a sudden, under Macaulay, the price of steel, skyrockets because of tariffs.
Right. Imagine you're an SME and you're in the middle of constructing a new factory. You've budgeted everything carefully, meaty. But then due to some new tariffs on imported steel, your material costs just jump up by 20%. This is a very real scenario that Insoco and many others have actually faced. It illustrates that really immediate and significant impact that tariffs can have, especially on these small to medium-sized businesses.
Okay, so before we get too deep into all of this, maybe take a step back for a second. For anyone who might not be totally familiar with all of the ins and outs, can you break down exactly what tariffs are and why governments use them in the first place?
Sure. So in the simplest terms, a tariff is basically a tax that's imposed on goods as they're crossing borders. So either coming in or going out of a country. Governments use them for a whole variety of reasons. Sometimes it's to protect domestic industries, shield them from foreign competition. They do this by making imported goods more expensive. Other times it's, a way to try and level the playing field in trade disputes or to retaliate against another country's trade practices.
So it's not always about protectionism then?
Not necessarily, no. It can be a strategic tool, with different goals. Really just depends on the political and economic landscape at the time.
And regardless of the reasoning behind them, Insoco points out that they pretty much always have an impact on the manufacturing industry.
Absolutely, yeah. And they highlight 3 key areas where that impact is felt most acutely. First, you have the direct hit on raw material costs. So if a manufacturer relies on imported steel or aluminum or any other material that happens to be subject to tariffs, their production costs obviously are going to go up, and that eats into their profit margin.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's almost like a perfect storm, isn't it? You've got these increased costs on it, you've got disrupted supply chains, and then diminished competitiveness, and it all kind of stems from tariffs.
Yeah.
But is it all bad news? Are there ways that SMEs can not only weather this storm, but actually come out stronger?
Well, there are definitely ways to adapt and mitigate the negative effects. But first, I think it's important to understand the full scope of the impact. So in addition to that raw materials issue, tariffs can cause major supply chain disruptions. So, imagine you're a company, you rely solely on a supplier in China for a crucial component, and then bam, tariffs hit. Suddenly you're scrambling to find alternatives, new suppliers. This can lead to delays, logistical nightmares, and a real scramble to keep up, especially for companies that depend on just-in-time manufacturing.
Right, and just-in-time manufacturing, that's all about efficiency, isn't it? It's about having the materials arrive just when you need them to keep production flowing smoothly.
Exactly, yeah. Any delay can throw off that whole system. And then the third major area where tariffs can impact manufacturers is global competitiveness. So when domestic goods become more expensive because of tariffs, they become less competitive on the global market, right, compared to goods that are produced in countries without those tariffs.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So you've got this triple threat then. Sure. Higher costs, supply chain chaos, and then the potential loss of market share. It's easy to see why manufacturers, especially smaller businesses, would be so concerned.
Oh, yeah. They have every right to be. And Insoco actually calls out SMEs as being particularly vulnerable in this situation. And it really boils down to resources, They often don't have the same financial cushion or the same leverage that larger corporations do to really navigate these complexities, right? Like take pricing power as an example. Larger companies, they can often negotiate these big bulk discounts with suppliers. And sometimes they can even pass on some of that increased cost, to the consumers. But SMEs, they often just don't have that luxury.
So they're kind of stuck absorbing the cost then, which can really impact their bottom line.
Oh, yeah, it absolutely can. And then you also have the issue of supplier networks. Large manufacturers or in a hug, they often have this really wide range of suppliers that they can choose from. So if one source becomes problematic, maybe because of tariffs. Yeah, they have options. But SMEs, with their, smaller networks, they can really find themselves in a bind, having to scramble to find new suppliers, which can be both really expensive and time-consuming.
It all adds up, doesn't it? Higher costs, limited flexibility, and then the added pressure of these time constraints.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And then we can't forget about the administrative burden of dealing with these tariffs, keeping up with all the constantly changing regulations, all the paperwork. I mean, it can be a full-time job. And SMEs often just don't have the staff to dedicate to that.
And it's interesting because in this report, Insoko doesn't just talk about these challenges in a general sense. They actually share some very specific examples of how tariffs have impacted their projects, and their clients.
Yes, and those real-world examples, they really bring this issue to life. For instance, they talk about this one project. They were building a flammable storage containment room. It's a very specialized type of facility. And they ran headfirst into this issue of steel tariffs.
So even in a niche construction project like that,
Yeah.
these global trade policies have a direct effect.
Absolutely, yeah. The price of steel had gone up so dramatically because of tariffs, and it forced them to reevaluate their entire budget for the project, the timeline, not to mention having some really difficult conversations with their clients about it.
I bet, yeah. Having to explain to a client, hey, this project is going to cost more, or
Yeah.
it's going to take longer than we initially planned because of these factors that are completely outside of our control. Well, that's got to be tough.
Yeah, transparency and clear communication are just so crucial in those situations, and Insoko really emphasizes that. They also provide another case study, this time involving a food production facility that we're doing an expansion. And, you wouldn't necessarily think that tariffs on certain imported goods would impact that type of project, but
Well, it's all connected, right? Even if you're not directly using a material that's subject to tariffs,
yeah.
those costs can still trickle down through the supply chain.
Precisely. In this case, it was HVAC and refrigeration components. Those were subject to tariffs. And, these are essential parts of a food production facility, right? So suddenly they became much more expensive, and that added these unexpected costs to the project.
I can imagine that led to some pretty frantic renegotiations.
Yeah. It did, for sure. Insoko had to go back to their suppliers. And they also had to have some very frank discussions with their clients about, potentially adjusting the project budget. And I think it really underscores the need for flexibility, proactive planning when you're operating in a world where these global trade policies can shift so rapidly.
Yeah, absolutely. So given all of these challenges then, what are some concrete steps that SMEs can take? I mean, is there a way to not only adapt to this tariff landscape, but to potentially even thrive in it?
Oh, there absolutely is. And Insoko lays out several practical strategies that SMEs can use. And it all starts with diversification. Diversifying your supply chain is key.
Don't put all your eggs in one basket, as they say.
Exactly. So instead of relying solely on one supplier, one region for that matter, look for alternatives. Having multiple sources all at a bare net that can provide a buffer, if tariffs disrupt one part of your supply chain.
Okay, that makes sense. Spread the risk a little bit. But are there other ways to kind of mitigate those cost increases as well?
Definitely. One option is to explore domestic sourcing. And while it might be a little bit more expensive initially, sourcing materials locally, that can help to kind of stabilize costs in the long run. And it could even lead to stronger relationships with local businesses.
Yeah, I mean, supporting local industries and potentially reducing your exposure to tariffs at the same time, that sounds like a win-win. Are there any other sort of proactive steps that SMEs can take?
Absolutely. Negotiate long-term contracts with your suppliers. Locking in prices for a certain period, that can provide a level of predictability, some protection against those sudden price hikes that tariffs can bring.
Stability is gold, especially in uncertain times like these. What about operational efficiencies? Can streamlining processes help offset some of those tariff-related costs?
Absolutely. It's about working smarter, not harder. By increasing operational efficiency, reducing waste, boosting productivity, you can create some real savings there. The savings might offset some of those tariff-related costs.
So you're basically making your business leaner and more resilient at the same time.
Exactly. But it's not just about what you do internally. Don't underestimate the power of collective action.
You're talking about joining industry associations or coalitions, like to advocate for policies that are more favorable to SMEs.
Exactly. There's strength in numbers. By joining forces with other businesses in your industry, you can amplify your voice. You can make a real impact on policy decisions.
And these days, technology can be a powerful ally as well. Are there any specific tools or platforms that can help SMEs navigate uh, the complexities of tariffs?
There are, yeah. Project management and financial software like Smartsheet or QuickBooks
Yeah.
can be incredibly valuable for SMEs. They can help you with, everything, managing your supply chain, tracking the financial impact of tariffs, just making more informed decisions overall.
So it sounds like what Insico is saying is that with the right strategies in place, SMEs can not only survive this tariff landscape, but they can potentially even turn it into an advantage.
That's really the key takeaway here, yeah. It's about turning challenges into opportunities. And one of the ways to do that is through innovation and collaboration.
I mean, it seems kind of counterintuitive, though, right? That something as disruptive as tariffs could actually end up spurring innovation.
I know it might seem that way at first, but when you think about it, when businesses are faced with these kinds of constraints and challenges, they often have to get really creative to find new solutions. So they might explore new production methods, or they might develop completely new products or services, or even find innovative ways to collaborate with other companies.
Yeah, I guess necessity really is the mother of invention. I'm curious, though, does InSoco give any specific examples of this kind of collaboration in action?
They do, yeah. They talk about collaborative buying as one strategy. It's a pretty straightforward idea, but it can be really effective. So instead of each individual SME trying to negotiate better prices with suppliers on their own, they can pool their purchasing power together to try and secure those bulk discounts.
Oh, interesting. It's almost like a collective bargaining agreement,
Yeah.
but for sourcing materials.
Exactly, yeah. It kind of levels the playing field
Yeah.
and gives smaller businesses some of those advantages that larger companies usually enjoy. Insoco also highlights the importance of industry forums and associations, like the South Florida Manufacturers Association, which I think we talked about before on the show.
Right, and those basically provide a platform for sharing knowledge and best practices, right?
Exactly. So by engaging in these forums, SMEs can stay informed about all the policy changes that are happening, they can learn from each other's experiences, and they can even find new ways to collaborate and support one another.
It's really all about fostering that sense of community
Mhm.
and shared purpose. So if we were to kind of distill all of this down
Yeah.
into some key takeaways for our listeners, what would they be?
I think the first takeaway is that tariffs are just this really complex issue with very real-world consequences for manufacturers of all sizes. Whether you're a small business owner or you're part of a large corporation, it's crucial to understand how these trade policies can impact your operations, how they can impact your bottom line, and even your long-term strategy.
Knowledge is power, right?
Absolutely. And I think the second key takeaway is that while tariffs do present some really significant challenges, especially for those SMEs, they don't have to be a death knell for businesses. By understanding the potential impact that tariffs can have, and by implementing strategic planning and really embracing this idea of innovation and collaboration, manufacturers can not only survive,
Yeah.
but they can actually thrive.
So it's really about being proactive
Yeah.
and adaptable.
Precisely. The companies that are going to succeed in this kind of environment are the ones that can anticipate the changes that are coming, adjust their strategies accordingly, and find those creative solutions to overcome these obstacles.
So for all the manufacturers out there listening,
Yeah.
as you continue to navigate this, tariff maze,
Yeah.
what's the one piece of advice that you would leave them with?
I would say don't view this as a time of limitations. View it as an opportunity. That this period of disruption in global trade, it can actually be a catalyst for innovation, for collaboration, for resilience. Look for ways to diversify your supply chains, strengthen your operations, and build those really strong relationships with your suppliers, with your industry peers, and of course, with your customers.
Those connections are crucial, aren't they? They're really the foundation for any kind of long-term success.
Absolutely, yeah. And just remember, you're not alone in this. There's a whole community of manufacturers out there who are facing these same challenges, and they're all working together to try and find solutions.
That's a great point to end on, I think. It's all about working together, learning from each other, and never losing sight of that bigger picture.
And on that note, I think we'll wrap up our deep dive into this world of tariffs. We hope you found this information valuable and that you're feeling a little bit more equipped to navigate this complex and ever-changing landscape.
And remember, everyone, stay curious, stay informed, and keep innovating. We'll see you next time.